panelist rights, so we're able to speak. Like I said, I'll introduce the plan for the format so that more of you will be able to join us. But normally we would obviously be in person, and we would be able to simply speak as and when, so we have a much more interactive format, but we'll come on to that. So in terms of context, why are we discussing the public interest internet? Well, when we put together the idea for this session, we were reflecting on how since the IGF first launched about 15 years ago, a lot has changed when it comes to the internet, to internet governance, and in terms of society and reliance on digital technologies. And there's been a shift, I think, in tone and narrative about the internet, particularly in public discourse, which has become, I think, a lot more negative. And there are a lot of challenges. Democracy and its institutions are discussed a lot now in terms of the threats that the rise in the use of social media has brought about, the deployment of new and emerging technologies without adequate frameworks and the risks that brings for human rights, the rise in cyber attacks, and the concentration of power amongst a few actors. Of course, the internet remains an enabler of rights, now more so than ever. So we really wanted to tackle where have we come to? What does a public interest internet actually look like? What are we striving for? And how can we get there? So the plan for the session is to look at this question in 4 different parts, or in 3 kind of main parts. So in the first 20 or so minutes, we want to have a discussion about what defines a public interest internet. What are the values that underpin it? What are its characteristics? And then secondly, what are the challenges for civil society internally? What are the internal challenges? What are the external challenges to bringing about that public interest internet and defending that? And then third, we'll, in the last, so that will be 20 minutes to defining a public interest in internet, then 20 minutes looking at what are the challenges, and then we'll look for 10 to 15 minutes at advocacy approaches and opportunities. So the how and the where of getting to a public interest internet. And just to let you know, this discussion feeds into another session, which is part of the main program of the IGF, the workshop is called Will the Public Interest Internet Please Stand Up? And I think, Bruna, you're going to share the details of the session in the chat. So we're hoping that this will feed into that session later on. So in terms of format, if we were together, as I mentioned, we would have an open discussion. So what we're going to do instead is just using the chat, which I think would be really limiting and I think it would be quite boring, to be honest. It would just be me and Bruna. And of course, we would be trying to integrate the chat, but we would like more people to be able to speak. So we're going to, for each round, so for those 3 different areas of the discussion, ask for 5 people to volunteer themselves in the chat or by raising your hand. And those people will be given panelist rights by our colleague in the IGF support, in the support unit. And then you'll be able to speak, and hopefully that will work. So let's see if that works. Okay. Bruna, did I miss anything?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about the sun. Did I miss anything before we get started?
That's about it. Yeah, I would just like to remind everyone to introduce yourself on the chat, just so we're pretty much informed about who else is in this room. And we have around 30 participants right now. So that's it.
Wonderful. So as I mentioned, we have a proposed format. And the first part of the session, we'd like to discuss what characterizes the public interest internet. What would it look like? And there are a number of questions and areas which a IGC member proposed we discuss, and so we can use that as a reference. And I think Bruna will be adding the questions in the chat, so you can use that as a reference. But I'll be facilitating each part of the discussion. So to discuss what is a public interest internet and what it would look like, what values would be prioritized in particular. Would 5 people be able to indicate in the chat if they would like to be able to participate verbally in this discussion? Please put your hand up, or Jeremy, you're asking a question, we'll come to that. So Amali, you said you'd like to be made a panelist. Great. Do we have any other people who would like to join in on the discussion about what characterizes Shiva? Okay, great. Anybody else would like to partake in this discussion verbally and be given panelist rights? I'll give it a couple of more minutes. Valeria, great. All right. Yes, thanks, Bruna, for asking. So we should, oh, Valeria didn't. Okay. All right. Would anyone else like to partake in that discussion verbally? Of course, you can continue to use the chat. Great. So
just Chantal, maybe in the meantime, I posted the questions on the chat, but I'm assuming we might have gotten it lost in between the inscriptions, the questions first for update. But then our questions for this session, for this part of the session, would be what public values should be prioritized? And as an example here, we're thinking about economic innovation versus personal and data protection and privacy. And another question would be where these public values should be embodied. So laws and policies, terms and conditions over digital companies, regulatory standards, and technical governance. This is just a start to our discussion, and we're welcoming every single view from all of you.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks so much, Bruna. So we have Amali and Shiva as well, not promoted, but you've been given rights to speak on this session, at the session. So please do come in with your thoughts on those questions, and we will keep looking at the chat and integrating those comments in as well. I see you've said, I hope you mean to touch on common values. Do feel free to ask to be made a panelist, and then we can have you comment further on that if you wish, or you can continue to expand on that in the chat. So Amali or Siva, do you want to take the floor here to comment on the question of what public values should be prioritized when we talk about public interest?
Yes, Sheetal,
Okay.
I just want to make a brief comment, not really go into the details of what constitutes public interest. The idea discussed is that is on the topic of public interest internet. The point is that the whole of the internet, the entire global internet, is meant to be in public interest. Internet is to be in global public interest. It is the nerve center for global development. It is the nerve center for governance. It is for progress. So with that attitude, if we look at the topic, it would be much more relevant and much more meaningful to think of public interest, and then we could go into details of what constitutes public interest and to what extent the internet as a whole could be viewed as an ecosystem for global public interest without compromising on its ability to let people connect anonymously and so on. So this is how I would approach the topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned the importance of seeing the internet as something that is for the public interest, that perhaps is a public good. And you mentioned that that should be the starting point, if I understand well. Amali, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, please. I totally agree with that. I was involved from WSIS PrepCom 1, and I was in the civil society section at that time, and it, that has always stayed with us, that we really wanted, and I'm just speaking for my own group, really wanted it to be a public good. Absolutely. It was going to be like a road. They used to talk about the highway, and the internet being the highway that everyone could travel in, no tolls or anything like that. We do understand, sophisticated internet use, there may be a charge, but really it should be for everyone. And I'm very much into that also now. I am the coordinator of a new dynamic coalition. It's called Data-Driven Health Technologies. So health is very, very important as a value, and that access to healthcare through things like telemedicine for remote areas, very, very important. So it should be very open internet, so that at a certain level, at least, there should be a functionality, especially for e-government level. Definitely be there. It's also for trade and opportunities for innovation. It must be there. So I'm looking really health access and economic innovation access, very important. I'm not how to say if it's values or whatever, but something that really is almost like a human right, I would say. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Amali, for sharing your views on that. And I saw also in the chat that Paula has offered some ideas as well and thoughts on what principles perhaps or characteristics we should be using when we refer to public interest. And she said, available, open, and safe. So I think, Amali, you also mentioned the importance of openness as well, and availability and access. And you mentioned as well how it's linked to healthcare. You mentioned functionality as key characteristic as well. And then at the end, you mentioned it as a human right, the ability to access the internet. So we have here a few ideas: availability, openness, safety, functionality, and access. And starting from the point of seeing the internet as certainly something in the public interest. But I did also see in the chat a few questions about whether or not that is actually the case anymore. Is it the case that the internet is being governed in the public interest? And one of the questions we wanted to come to in this segment as well is the question of where are these values being embodied? So what places and in what frameworks are they being embodied? And Bruna, I think you've added that question to the chat. So we have some food for thought there. Laws and policies, terms and conditions of digital companies are some examples, regulatory standards. Perhaps other ideas might be, protocols as well. So if you have any thoughts on that, please do also share those. And I've just seen that Vrixen Acosta has been asked to be able to speak. Are we able to update him as well to panelist, please? And Nena, is that right, Bruna?
Yes,
Okay.
Nena has her hand up as well.
Okay, great. So Vrixen and Nena have been asked to be able to speak. So Nena has just been added, so I'll go to you, Nena, first, and then hopefully we can have Vrixen as well comment on that topic. Nena?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. I wasn't ready to come on camera, but I think something made me want to come. When we're talking about the open internet, I think that we need to look at all the layers of the internet itself, whether it's the design, whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's the use, and before you even get to the policy level. But maybe I should just concentrate on design, use, and policy. I think that the open design is very critical if we're looking at whether sometimes we say open internet and open web, but the open internet precedes the open web. By the way, I'm from the Web Foundation. So the openness in design is very critical. The openness in use is very important. These days we're talking about fragmentation of the internet, where we have a country saying, I have a country and I want to build my own internet. That is not the ideology of it. That is not the nature of the open internet. Someone has spoken about a digital good, a digital public good. You might have missed it, but earlier last week, on Wednesday, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, was at the European Parliament to advocate for the right to internet as a human right. We haven't been able to do that at the UN, but it's going to come. And the way we're looking at the internet is something everyone should be part of. So the open internet embodies that ideology of for everyone. It embodies the ideology of co-creation. It embodies the ideology that everyone should be able to access, to use, and to benefit. We should not forget the part of the benefit. Now, there are quite a number of platforms. I mean, I'm not mentioning anyone, but there are huge platforms whose membership go up to billions. And we've seen these platforms getting themselves up as mini countries with their own rules and stuff, and gently tightening up stuff around their users or their citizens. So what the open internet, I believe, should be, I mean, the principles is that everyone should be able to walk in and walk out, as we've always said, opt in and opt as you want and opt out as you want. Both should be available. So one is design, two is use, three is benefit, and at the policy level, I think that this is what we need to drive to country levels. There are no global internet policy making instances. I mean, this is IGF, let's not forget. And for those who joined lately, it's always good to reiterate the fact that the only reason that we have the IGF is because it's a non-decisionary forum instance. So we've done this for 15 years. We come, we talk, and we walk away, and we've seen that it doesn't work. And that's why I'd like to encourage us to pay closer attention to what is happening at the digital corporation at the UN level, because we cannot continue to say, oh, let's keep going. It's we, no problem. I don't think it helps everyone. There needs to come a time when, as a global digital community, we need to say, where are we coming from and where are we going? I don't think the IGF at this time, the way it is playing that role. Where is open internet being seen, being practiced? I'll end with the contract for the web. As the Web Foundation, we have convened major organizations and entities and some countries. It's a 9-principled contract that says, here is what is expected of countries, governments, here's what is expected of private sector, and here is what is expected of users. I know that these are the three traditional stakeholders. We had these 15 years ago at the World Summit, but over time, the stakeholder base has increased. I mean, when we're talking about multi-stakeholder today, we're looking at the technical community, we're looking at the academic community. But I'm going to close now and say, so there are different levels that come into the internet, and openness is needed at all of these levels. Where is this coming to be? Where do we see it? I think the contract for the web is a beginning of it. I know that most people here are civil society, but I think that we can also give a louder voice to either our government counterparts or our private sector counterparts. I'm done.
Thank you, Nana, and thank you for bringing in that point about the different levels or layers at which this question of openness is relevant, and also pointing out the contract for the web and the digital cooperation roadmap, which we can come to when we discuss in the third part of our session, advocacy opportunities and spaces for civil society collaboration on these issues. And so what's really coming out powerfully in this discussion on values and what characterizes a public interest internet is the openness of the internet at different layers or levels, you know, in every way, more or less. And what you also mentioned was platforms and how powerful they are, and perhaps also the lack of accountability around that, which is something which is coming through in the chat as well. And there are a lot of points there, which I think will be very relevant to the second part of this discussion on challenges we have in trying to ensure that the values which we've discussed around openness, for example, and access are actually respected. So we'll come on to that, but thanks so much for engaging there on the chat around this topic. Brixen, would you like to come in?
Yes, here I am. Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are. I'm Brixen Acosta from Venezuela. I'm a bit tired of being up since 2 in the morning, the first meeting here for Missions Public with the Internet project that I am part of. Yeah, I've been almost about 9 hours up. And I would like to, to say that I consider an important issue is digital literacy. I think that digital literacy is being displaced or not taken care of the way it should be. Because in this pandemic, myself, I have met offline and online many people, and they don't have any knowledge of anything online. And even the people who think they know it all, like the younger ones, that they are online almost all the time, they don't have any awareness about protection, the data they put, several things, and they don't have not only the knowledge, the digital knowledge, but their responsibility and the ethics, and sometimes they just publish everything they think in the minute, and they don't realize that it doesn't go anywhere, because the so-called right to forget doesn't really exist. What exists is the right to ask some site to delete some information, and it could take months or even years. But once something is published on the net, it is very, very difficult for it to get forgotten, because anybody can bring it up any minute. the only real way for something like a scandal, or let's say a teenager publishes a picture, nude or semi-nude, to be forgotten is for another scandal to come up and bury the first one. So for me, it's very important, the digital literacy. I see also many teachers who were forced to get online. They didn't even know how to use like Word or Excels, much less Zoom or be in Telegram groups. They teach classes online, and they are just trying. They are worse than the younger one who learn easier. But I think, yeah, digital literacy is a must. It's a really must for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rickson. And sorry to cut you off there. I'm just aware that we're coming to the end of the time we'd allocated for this part of the discussion on characteristics of the public interest internet. And you mentioned lots of challenges to, well, I think also to one of the layers which Dana was mentioning around use of the internet and digital literacy. You made a point around that and how important that is, and how many challenges there may be in different contexts to ensuring that users are able to use the internet in a safe and secure way, if I understand what you said. And so a lot of what we've discussed in terms of values have pointed to the need for openness in all ways when it comes to the internet. And I think that's a really good basis to go on to talk about the challenges, which is the next segment of our discussion. And we'd like to spend around 20 minutes, if you would like to as well, on discussing what are the challenges to promoting openness, to ensuring openness of the internet, for example, and the other values that were mentioned in order to protect a public interest internet. And we've had Valeria in the chat offer quite a lot of food for thought on this, which Bruna and Valeria, you're very welcome to come on this discussion as well. But if you don't want to, Bruna, perhaps you can summarize some of the key points we've had in the chat.
Yes, of course. But let's make sure Valeria doesn't want to come in first.
And you might not be able to.
Yes.
But yes, Valeria, do feel free.
She's already updated to a panelist.
Oh, right.
Here,
okay.
So. No, but that's I can start to summarize
Please
this.
do.
This was a really interesting discussion on how this notion of what a public interest is often affected by corporations and governments and their activities in the digital space. So Valeria had some interesting points in how control is exercised by these two stakeholders, and how also their power is exercised over the public domain in our global digital commons. And this is a process that's often leading us to cases and products such as surveillance businesses and capitalism, and also securitization of the digital space. So I think it's important to highlight one question from Valeria that's also bridging with our next discussion. That is, how can we demand governments to hold private corporations accountable when they're also controlling the internet space through authoritarian practices, and also how this discussion is as well affecting everything we have been doing over this space for at least 20 years now. So that's it.
That's great. Thanks so much. And thanks, Valeria, for adding that comment in the chat. So I'll open to you all now to ask for your perspectives on that. Do you think one of the biggest challenges, or the biggest challenge to ensuring the openness of the internet and other values of a public interest internet is the power of a small group of companies who are able to perhaps operate with impunity and are not accountable to the public. Is that one of the biggest or the biggest challenge? What do you think about that in terms of challenges? Victoria is saying that today's internet is an internet of walled gardens, uninteroperable corporate stuff. Okay, I think that's very similar to what others have been saying.
So we have Amalie with her hand up as well.
Okay, Amalie, would you like to come in?
Yes, I was privileged. I was a past president of the Vancouver Community Network in Canada, and this was some years ago. But when they had discussions on privacy, lawful access, and so forth, it was really very, very nice, the kind of public engagement that they did. They invited all the nonprofits, and we really had that opportunity to provide our perspective, and the government really listened. That was beautiful. Recently, I'm also participating with EuroDig, and also I'm British Sri Lankan, so that's who I am. We have been, there are sort of online forums, and I know some ideas are being picked up for sure from these. So there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of encouragement for public viewpoints, and definitely nonprofits are engaged very much so. It's not just the very large companies or even the very large nonprofits. People are able to voice their opinion, and I know EuroDig, for instance, is a great platform, and lots of the European Parliament people are listening in, and so forth. So I think it really is about that democratic engagement, and if people are finding in certain areas, that is something to be really encouraged. And even maybe a framework put in place. IGFs are great frameworks, and I know people are really being able to share their views, and I really, really support it. And it's but maybe there's more. I know you're talking about IGF Plus and so forth, and maybe that's where it is. So it's really, I think, if you're given access, you don't have to travel, because that really is very limiting. If you can engage through the access, then I think a lot of that can be resolved. Thank you.
Okay, great. And thanks for expanding on those points, and also perhaps pointing to the hopeful instances and opportunities for democratic engagement, for the sharing of views through civil society mechanisms, particularly in contexts where that is possible, where dialogue is possible, and then pointing to the IGF as a framework as well. And I noticed in the chat that Valeria was mentioning the importance of inclusive, transparent, accessible, and accountable mechanisms like the IGF and strengthening that. And I believe, Nana, you had mentioned the importance of us engaging, civil society engaging in such processes like the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, which is engaging in that issue or in that question around the strengthening or the reform of mechanisms like the IGF in order to promote more inclusive digital cooperation. So that's something we can again come to in the third part of our session on opportunities. So Deidre, you've mentioned that a challenge is not being aware of predicating our values on the individual and others on community. And I believe Amrita wanted to also say something if she has been updated to panelist, we can ask her to come in. Otherwise, not yet. Okay. But I think, I just wanted to point you as well in the chat to some questions or some points which we received before the session from Shirley, which was also food for thought about challenges. So polycentric governance in the internet governance field, many different places where you have to be active, that's a challenge. Lack of global leadership. Is the current leading role of Europe as a regulator enough? It's posited as a question. Access to policymaking, regulatory capacity of governments, interest of authorities in controlling the internet. So there are some more challenges there, which you might agree with or want to add to. So I'm not sure if we have any other panelists with speaking rights. Poncelet, you said, understanding the exact role of our regulatory authorities and their role is also a challenge. We'll capture all of this. So one of the points that Amrita, you were making, which I hope you'll be able to come on and speak to this in a second, but I'll just read out the comment in the meantime, is that governments are waking up to the power of big tech companies. However, the biggest challenge will be to ensure that governments do not take over that power, and the balance of power is important where user rights are protected. Great, thanks for that comment. So that's again, around balance of power and ensuring that it doesn't rest with either tech companies or governments, but they're both accountable to users. So that's a huge challenge. And if anybody wants to comment further on that one, please do feel free to do so in the chat. Brixen, you wanted to come in. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm listening that we're talking now about openness, big companies, etc. And I consider that civil society not only should have a role of being more controlling, but must have a role of being controlling of especially big companies. For example, I'll give you an example I have right now. About 3-4 months ago, I created a Twitter account for a special event. And I had been using it occasionally. I'm saying about starting last month, I began to send invitations for many people to join an event that happened a week ago. What happened? Well, Twitter considered that I was maybe spamming and suspended my account. That account. My personal account has over 12 years. So it's almost as old as Twitter itself. But I have never had a problem with my personal account. Now, in that special account, I have been for the past 3-4 weeks sending like appeals, telling it's to promote a non-profit or organization event, and they don't pay attention. They just say, push this button and I will call you to verify a person is answering that. But when I do that, they say, well, we're gonna call you right now, try later. And after several tries, they say, you have tried too many times, try later. When is later? 1 day before, 1 day after, 2 days after, 1 week. And I feel I am in like who was first, the hen or the egg in an endless loop. And I haven't been able to recuperate that account, which maybe violated a rule that is a new account and I sent too many tweets in a short time, but it wasn't a violation like somebody tweeting about killing somebody. That issue for me, not only is because of my account, but that small issue should have been resolved by now, several weeks ago. But they don't pay attention to somebody personal, somebody like me. And I think maybe the civil society had more control, they could watch over those appeals and say, wait, why don't you send, if you can call that person, why don't you send an SMS message and that person verify that that's a person and that suspension is free. And if the civil society would have some control, maybe the issues like this could have been resolved very easily. I'm talking about Twitter here, but you find many examples in Facebook, in sites, shopping sites like Amazon's, that they are so big, they are so slow answering, that many cases that could be settled in a matter of hours, not days, hours. They don't do that, and the helpless citizen is in the eternal, endless loop. Cannot do anything about it.
I think, sorry to interrupt you, Vixen. So we only have a few minutes left for this segment of the discussion, but really appreciate your views and sharing your personal experience of the difficulties that you've encountered. And I'm sure many people have experienced that. And some of what that brings up around certain principles around access to remedy, transparency, which are lacking in your experience. And I think that considering that social media and these platforms are really a basic way for people to interact with others and to exercise their freedom of expression, that those limits that have been put on your ability to do so without clear reason and without quick enough remedy and support are really a part of what we're talking about in terms of the challenges to public interest internet when these platforms have so much power and there's a lack of accountability. So we do also now have a couple of people who had asked to be promoted to panelists so they can share their points. And so I'm going to ask Amrita and Simon to come in. Maybe Amrita, can you take the floor first? Is that okay?
Yes, thank you, Sheetal. I would want to make a brief point apart from the one which I made on the chat, is that since civil society has different viewpoints, they are diverse. Many times they are not convergent when policy making happens, especially in national level. The idea which aligns favorably to the government, those people may perhaps be brought to the table, the others may not be brought, or at times even civil society is not available in the table. And that happens in countries like India and others, and not sure if it happens elsewhere. So it is important to see how we can mainstream civil society voices when decisions are being made, so that, the rights of individuals or the transparency which is required or the protectionism which is required can also be highlighted, and perhaps see how the IGF or the other discussions which are happening in the global platforms can kind of trigger the importance of having people in the real discussion, just not notionary people in these discussions.
Yes, and that is, I think it is a challenge that others have brought up in the chat around the meaningful engagement of civil society and public interest groups in these discussions. So the challenges around co-option perhaps is something that can also be discussed, and really ensuring civil society is able to be at the table from the get-go and really meaningfully engage and shape outcomes is a challenge which we've noted. And Simon, you wanted to come in as well, so can I come to you?
Hello, hi. I'm sorry, I just mistakenly click on the raise hand, so I didn't want to have any comments. So I'm very sorry for that.
That's no problem, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So Beatrice, you put in the chat that regarding the current leading role of Europe as a global regulator, this is a central issue to be debated. We have sought to build reflections in Latin America from a perspective of the South. What are the risks posed? Will Europe look at this challenge considering the Latin American context? And Valeria, you've added that you agree that we need more recognition of civil society views in shaping IG at all levels and strengthening capacity. So I think we have some key points here, which we'll definitely come back to and summarize at the end, but we will want to build on this discussion about challenges to promoting a public interest internet, which in the first segment of our discussion, we identified some key values that need to that should define a public interest internet, which includes openness at all levels and the ability to use an internet that's safe and secure, and access and functionality. And I think that those were some of the key values that were brought up. Do let me know if I've missed anything. And then we've had a lot of discussion and challenges about the dominance of certain actors in the space, tech companies and authorities also gaining more power over the internet, and a lack of space for civil society to engage meaningfully in discussions. And Vixen, you shared some personal stories about that experience as well. There were comments in the chat around the internet being like a series of walled gardens because of surveillance and private company dominated platforms shaping interaction on the internet. But we also had some positive views of opportunities for dialogue and consultation with the public, and the fact that people are able to voice their opinions, and there are frameworks like the IGF for engaging on these issues. But I think also from Amrita, a bit of a not so much a warning, but a reminder that when we're talking about ensuring that tech companies are held account and that there is a democratic governance of their power, that we don't move towards having government take over that power instead, and that the balance of power should always be towards ensuring that users have their rights and there is democratic accountability to users at the end of the day. So those are my my points that I have noted from the discussion. I'm sorry if I've missed anything. Valeria, you mentioned one bottleneck is the mechanisms and practicalities of effectively holding governments and corporations accountable. I would be interested in hearing about concrete mechanisms. We're going to get onto that, and I really hope that people will engage in that discussion as well. One that, and Judith, you're saying standard driven so that all users can use it. Accessibility is often an afterthought. And then we have another comment again about the walled gardens, I think, and the different philosophies or ideologies that are shaping the internet. Andrew Campling, you mentioned one of the areas that is lacking meaningful input is the development of new internet standards, which is typically dominated by tech companies. Okay, we are at the point of moving on to the third section of our agenda, which is around advocacy opportunities to address these challenges and to build and to promote those values which we discussed at the beginning. And I can see a lot of points for jumping off to that discussion already in the chat. So opportunities may include text standard and protocol development and the relevant institutions or forums. And then mechanisms and practicalities of effectively holding governments and corporations to account. If anybody wants to come in on more concrete examples of that, please do. And we also heard earlier the digital cooperation roadmap and the strengthening of the IGF as mechanisms. So I'll open it up now, and if you want to be promoted to panelist, please do say to comment on this question of opportunities and of ways, so the how and the where of ensuring that these challenges are overcome, or at least taken into consideration, and those values are promoted. So does anybody have any ideas or suggestions or even examples they want to share?
This is
yes,
Amalia. Thank you. I think civil society, sometimes there's a little bit of a negative impression of what civil society is. Often the word activists are used and so forth. But I think civil society must be looked as risk managers. They are the people who flag, they initiate, that's fine, that's activism, advocacy, but they also then monitor and they flag. So they provide that risk management tool. And I think, coming from a civil society background here to IGF, and with a bit of a private sector, I think it's really important that we kind of change that image, that we are very important critical people looking at the risk of the internet. So that's what I wanted to share, please. And especially, obviously, my key thing is access. So yeah.
Great, thanks so much, Amali, and thanks for that framing as well, and pointing out one of the many roles that civil society play in these discussions. And so thank you very much for that. If anybody wants to comment or react to that, please do in the chat. And if anybody wants to yes, Shiva, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was exactly going to raise that particular point that Amali just mentioned about. There is a lot of confusion about, or confusion and perception about who civil society is in different parts of the world. In India, for example, the term is probably equated with, probably interpreted politically. A lot of political activism is associated with civil society. So the moment somebody says I'm from civil society, he or she is either seen as an activist or as a politician, local politician who organizes a group and protest in the street and so on. So that is probably the mindset in different forms in different parts of the world. That is blocking the legitimacy of civil society. So that needs to be fundamentally addressed. Going back to India again, historically, the buzzword, whenever governments want to consult, the term used is public-private consultation or public-private partnership when it comes to implementation of projects. And there public implies government and private implies the business sector, and it has always been a partnership of government and the private sector, and we have to tell them that this has to move beyond public-private partnership, and the terminology has to change to multi-stakeholder or public plus private plus civil society, or government plus business plus civil society, and then modified forms to suit issues. And so the legitimacy is something, or the clarity of perception is something that the internet governance communities, civil society has to strive for, and it is something that we have to work and make sure that the actors here in the roles of civil society are indeed from civil society, and then they don't have extreme views, and they are constructive, and these organizations are constructive, and they have to showcase and demonstrate to the other stakeholders that we are a very constructive stakeholder group. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for those comments. And if anybody has any responses to that or wants to share any thoughts on how the question around legitimacy of civil society is experienced in different contexts, please do. And there are a lot of, I think there were a lot of points there you made around how or who civil society seem to be, whether or not they're seen to be as legitimate actors, how they're interpreted politically. And those are all kind of key issues, I think, when it comes to practically engaging in spaces. And so if anybody has any advice, guidance, or comments on that, please do feel free to share that. But it's something, yes, Bruna, please.
just briefly comment and highlighting some of our experiences from both here in Brazil and parts of Latin America. But I think, and this is something that was part of SIVA's intervention right now, which is the coalition building side of our activity. And so far here in Brazil, we have been pretty successful in this task of engaging and also discussing with other stakeholders how to put policies forward and how to halt even the approval of such policies and regarding a lot of subjects. So I would once again like to highlight this coalition building side because it is one way of achieving this so-called legitimacy, even though we know that it might be a little biased or even take some groups out of it, but still it was the solution we have found here so far, and even a solution to overcome a lot of our issues in such as funding, participation, distances, and so on. So just a short contribution.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. And Bruno, one of the reasons that we have the IGC, of course, and we have this event, but we also coordinate, is because of that belief in the strength and the importance of coalitions and collaborative work. So thank you for bringing an example from Brazil. If anybody has any others, please do share. Nana, you said you have something to add. Do come in.
Indeed. I mean, the legitimacy, I just sent off an email about that kind of thing. I was smiling when this came up. I want to share three or four ideas about legitimacy. I think that the civil society is the poorest of the stakeholders, right? So you don't have funding. One thing you need to be aware of is that funding is a form of legitimacy, because you need to be somewhere, you need to engage. Even if it's in COVID times, you still need the resources to be there. So funding is something very important. So if you want to engage long term, you need to strategize around the funding. The second, it's on coalition building. I mean, if you trained in diplomacy, they will tell you that it's not how smart you are, but how smart the other person is. So it's not that you've done a good job, you are known and all of it. It's not enough. What is enough is that you can match strength to strength, I mean, to a level with the other stakeholders. And on your own, as a small organization that is based in New York, you cannot match with African countries. On your own, as a small NGO based in Nigeria, in Ghana, I don't know, you cannot match with European member states of the UN for that matter. So it is always very important that civil society builds coalitions and shows a united front on thematic issues. The third is on, what did I write here? I can't even read my own. Starting early. So starting early on an initiative is very important. Right now, I'm working on initiatives for 2022, not 2021. If you begin early, you have an easier entry space, right? What happens is that civil society organizations hear about an event when they're sending out the RSVPs, and you're like, this is very important, we need to be there, we need to be heard. Fuck you, because, oh goodness, are we live? Because these are things people have planned for the past 3, 4, 5 years, and then you come in, you're seen as a noisemaker. So we need to plan long-term engagement and begin early, because when you begin early, entrance is easier. And finally, I've written down the expertise. It's not enough to be an activist. You need to learn what it is you're being an activist about, what it is you're bringing. We're now talking about the public interest internet. When we're talking about the internet, there are layers to it. You need to be educated around it. You need to read up on it. You need to study it. You need to raise the level of your expertise. Because there are people who work for their countries, or people who work for their private companies. That's all they do. So global level civil society policy engagement cannot be a voluntary activity. It's not something you do 1 hour a month. It's something that you really need to take time to cultivate yourself and match toe-to-toe with people and show that you are an expert on this, or at least you're willing to bring in content. If I take, for instance, Digital Corporation, when we started, we were asked to, some people joined as HLB members. We were asked to bring in content. There were consultations. When the first report came out, we were asked for contributions. So you didn't do all of that, right? You felt it was not any of your business. You've not followed that long process. And then you get to hear there's a tech envoy, like, oh, what is a tech envoy? Why tech envoy? People will just be looking at like, who's this crazy person, right? So my point is, first, get your funding right. If you don't have funds to engage, you might need to rethink it. Let's have coalitions, join like-minded organizations. Let's start early when the entrance level is still a bit open, and let's up our expertise. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Nana. Lots of concrete points there around the importance of being resourced to be seen as legitimate actors who can actually engage, the importance of coalition building so you can match strength to strength, planning long-term engagements, so you can be taken seriously, coming in early. And I wanted to pick up on that point in our last section of this discussion, because it would be great to get some ideas from people on where we can be doing that long-term engagement. Finally, you mentioned expertise and the importance of taking time to cultivate that. So thank you for all those really specific points. I think there's a lot there that people can reflect on. And Shirley has shared some comments in the chat as well, which I'd encourage you to take a look at, because actually Shirley's points were really a basis for our discussion today, and every sort of a segment of this discussion has really been based on some suggestions she made to Bruna and I for how to approach this session. So thanks so much, Shirley. And I think, Sylvia, you wanted to come in on this point. Is it around legitimacy or something else? Either way, anyway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chital. Silvia Cadena from Brisbane, Australia. I'm a MAG member. It's 2 a.m. here, so apologies if I speak very slow, but I'm about to fall asleep. I just wanted to make a couple of comments on the importance of evidence-based activism, if you may. I think that many of you have been very active in documenting and making submissions, for example, to support the development of regulatory frameworks that better support or look with more positive eyes, for example, community networks. And I think that one of the most interesting aspects of those processes has been that by sharing cases, studies on documented in a similar way, in similar context, a lot of issues that were common across different deployments of community networks, it started to make sense to people in the private sector that are actually investing in this kind of projects, right? So a few years ago at the IGF, before this kind of picked up the use of the term and having many sessions and people contributing in different spaces started to come in. We organized a session that was about the shifts in the paradigms, that one touches on the funding side that Nena mentioned, but also more than funding is on the ownership of the infrastructure. So when you look at how the European Union is regulating and how a lot of the regulations also come from the FCC and other countries copy. You also need to take into consideration that they are the same ones issuing the certifications for all the equipment that is more or less that is used to deploy internet services and tools all around the world. And that there are quite considerable political forces that are not necessarily based on evidence, changing how other companies can innovate and disrupt that market and how other products are available. I'm not going to name brands because you probably know which fights I'm thinking about, but is this thing about innovating on devices and routers, antennas, owning your own technology, owning the content that you put on that technology through, owning the network that you use, makes very different how it shifts the power balance, because then you are offering a service and you are part of that negotiation table, you are part of that conversation, even if you are a small provider. And regulatory frameworks are rapidly changing because it is become very evident, very apparent all over the world that one single type of business model is not the one that is going to connect the unconnected, and everybody is looking at ways of accelerating the digital transformation processes even faster than what COVID did. So many organizations that were thinking about how to incorporate their digital transformation processes in stages, in years, and then they had to do it in a couple of weeks before the lockdowns, right? So it's something that is important for the civil society to identify, let's say, that horse that you guys are going to document properly and use as a case to actually build a coalition or build the support around and build a coherent argument that supports the different interventions, and try to verify the same way that misinformation and disinformation, civil society has been critical to push for checking your sources and things like that. Very similar to check your technical sources and making sure that the comments that you are making are actually based on how infrastructure works, so that you're evidence-based, you are supported by experience, and that's how you gain that legitimacy and that space, let's say, to have those conversations in terms of what spaces to choose for where to go to have these conversations. Unfortunately, I wish there was the one place so you could maximize your resources, save your voice, do it all in one time zone, and be very efficient, right? But unfortunately, the conversations are picked up by pieces. So there are some forums that are dealing with the subject matter expertise, and because the internet is in many parts is just seen as the tool where everything goes, then they may be touching on internet aspects of the infrastructure or how do you deploy it, but not really, because they are talking about health or preservation of the oceans or trade or something else. So in many cases, you need to follow up a lot of different processes to actually come up with a realization of where is this first decision that is going to put the dominoes down, and then everything is going to come to fruition. So strategizing, I think, might be the right word. Plotting might come to mind, but it's around trying to figure out what concurrent processes are happening and which ones feed into each other, and how you could influence those spaces with evidence-based, technically sound information in promoting innovation in ownership in devices, content, and network deployment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and thank you to and thank you specifically for staying up at this hour and to partake in this conversation and to share so clearly your thoughts. I definitely wouldn't be able to do that at 2 a.m. So, I'm just amazed and grateful for your contribution. So you mentioned the importance of evidence-based research and documentation, and brought into the discussion something I think we hear much of, which is also mentioned in the chat, I think, around the importance of being technically sound and legitimate, and the ownership or self-ownership of infrastructure and diversifying business models to really, I guess maybe going back to that point about openness, to really ensure that. And you also mentioned the importance of understanding how different spaces link together. There is such a variety of spaces where these discussions are had on internet governance, even more so now than when the IGF was first launched. And so that's a challenge, but one of the responses to the challenge, I think you mentioned, if I didn't misunderstand, is understanding the links between them, and seeing how things all fit together, all the different pieces, and that can really help to support better engagement. So I'm going to now, I just need to look at the chat. What we're going to be doing in the next few minutes before the end of this session is just discussing some opportunities we might have and spaces where you think it's important to engage. I read in the chat earlier about the importance of technical standard communities. We heard from Nena about the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, and there are also other spaces which people have mentioned. So please do feel free to share more ideas there, or to request coordination and collaboration around different areas that you might be working on. What Bruna and I will do, for those of you who have to leave, I know that there are people who have to leave, is write up the discussion, write up comments, and perhaps make some recommendations to you, to the IGC, on ways that we can take forward this discussion in the coming year. So hopefully that will be useful. But before we do that, please do come in with more ideas and more reflections on where we can take this discussion and where we can collaborate. What are the relevant spaces? If anybody has anything to add.
And also highlighting, Chital, some of the a suggestion from SIVA for us to coordinate a call from our participants and coordinators from 15 years ago and see what has changed from the WSIS process to today, and maybe grab some more knowledge and also recommendations from them. So that would be a great moment and idea for us to host. Thank you for that, Siva.
Great. Any other suggestions? Please do share. Jeremy, you're bringing up a practical point around the list and actually accessing the list. So we will share that with you. Do get in touch with us if you still have issues afterwards, but it is active. So does anybody have any final comments for this section of the agenda, which is on opportunities, forums, spaces to take forward and to promote the values that we discussed earlier around openness and to deal with the challenges that we discussed? Or indeed any reflections on the previous aspects of the agenda? Do feel free to come in. As I mentioned, we'll write this up and suggest ways forward after the session. Bruna, did you have any comments that you wanted to add at this point?
Well, I guess we can maybe start this discussion with the kind of outline that we thought for this part, right, Chital? Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of us have discussed ideas on technical standards organizations. We have seen ICANN and IETF. And a lot of us trying to act or have a more present civil society over there. So that's an arena that's pointed out. But we also have thought about intergovernmental organizations such as ITU, WIPO, WTO, Council of Europe, HRC, and things like that. So maybe my question is, from those of us, from those of you who are working within these spaces, what do you guys think should be improved, and how can we improve our participation or even bring more attention to to other arenas, such as these ones that we have mentioned? And if not, if there is anything else you would like to highlight on this.
Or any questions you may have, any activities you're engaging with either nationally, regionally, or globally that you want to highlight for other members. Okay, Shimmy, you're expanding on your points. It is coming to the point half an hour past the hour where people might have to go to other sessions, for example. So I do understand that. So perhaps, Bruna, we can wrap up, and we can post in the chat from Shirley that the relevant part of the agenda on defining a long-term advocacy agenda and opportunities for people to think through. And then what I would say is, would be great to post the link to sign up for the mailing list. Oh, thanks, Leonard, for pointing that out. We will do that as well. So let me summarize. Oh, okay. The list was moved quite a while ago, so and the information about this event was shared on there. So I'm sorry about the confusion, but we will rectify that, and you will be able to sign up for the list. There you go. Bruna has just shared that. So looking at my notes, I will try and summarize for the last few minutes what we've discussed. So when we discussed what a public interest internet should look like or what should embody, people mentioned the availability and openness of the internet, being able to use it as a safe space, the importance of digital literacy, and the importance of considering access, including for health and access to health care and e-governance via the internet, and really to be able to operationalize the concept or the principle of openness at all levels. So that was, you know, some of the values and characteristics that we discussed. And then we discussed challenges to that, and a lot of people mentioned the dominance of tech platforms, the lack of accountability, the risks of authoritarian governments and governments more generally taking over. There was also a point made about the role of civil society and the role of civil society as risk managers, spaces like the IGF, the importance of democratic spaces, and opportunities for public dialogue. Then we had a good discussion, I think, about legitimacy and the legitimacy of civil society, and a lot of points made about the importance of coalition building. And Nena made quite a few points about the importance of ensuring that civil society have legitimacy through having enough funds and resources to be able to participate in relevant discussions, expertise, and planning engagement from the start, and the importance of coalition building. We have some examples of the importance of coalition building. Sylvia made some important points about self-ownership and the importance of owning infrastructure and management of one owns technology and infrastructure, the importance of diversifying business models, the internet and the varied amounts of or spaces where these discussions are being had, and the importance of knowing where discussions are being had and the links between them all. And then I think on the chat, we also had points about the importance of coalition building in terms of being able to bring different viewpoints and to the table, even though they're very diverse, identifying commonalities between very divergent viewpoints, perhaps. So that's something that is always a challenge, I think, with coalitions, but can be done, and something that we certainly would like to make sure the IGC is able to do on some of the issues that we've discussed. So, Deidre, you've said we need to become aware of the values that we do not agree on, as this will help us towards collective activity. Yes, so we don't, I think, have time to discuss that now, but that's something that we can definitely note as a point that you made, and importance of considering, yes, what do we agree on, what do we not agree on, so that we can move forward together. And so some people mentioned the different spaces that they're working in, and I just wanted to mention some work that we're doing around the digital cooperation roadmap, which Nena had mentioned, but isn't able to share with you herself as she's had to leave. But before I do that, Bruna, would you like to tell us about the workshop that this session will feed into?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Sheetal. And very briefly, a lot of these session discussions will help us and will feed directly IGC's workshop on the next the Friday of next week, so November the 13th. And the idea there will be to discuss in two sessions. The first will be the characteristics of a public interest internet and current challenges to ensuring it. And the second one will be for our panelists and also our audience to mention examples of measures and proposals which can protect the public interest internet. So this is a session that will focus on examples such as community networks, also part of the technical community and the work some of us have been doing on that. And we will be joined by Ramon Broca, Mevish, Farzani, and the two of us as well in this. So if you could and can join, please come to the session on Friday, the 13th of November. And I'm going to post the link on the chat again. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thanks so much. And I think that the session which Bruna, you've just shared is a really great follow-up from our discussion, and hopefully our discussion will be a useful springboard for those panelists there to discuss this topic of a public interest internet. We can pick up some of these points and add even more concrete examples and ideas, which I hope will help us collaborate on commonalities in the future. So what I mentioned before is a report that Bruna and I, or summary that we'll share with you about the session. Hopefully that will help with the session on the 13th as well. And we'll note what's been mentioned in the chat. And finally, before I let you go, just to let you know that as was shared on the IGC list, a number of groups have been cooperating on the operationalization of the Secretary General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, which is something Nena has been working on facilitating. One action which we took was to send a letter to the President of the General Assembly calling on him or requesting that the recommendation for I think it's a statement on trust and security be developed and be adopted by the UN, which is a recommendation in the Secretary General's roadmap. Second, we have also sent a letter to the Secretary General and his office requesting that the roadmap operationalization is open and inclusive, and the tech envoy position and mandate is consulted on in an open and inclusive way. So we sent that letter as well. Third, we are working on a position paper for the tech envoy position to try and shape that so that it is an open and inclusive process and reflective of some of the priorities and the values that we've discussed here around openness and connecting all the various stakeholders and spaces that need to be connected on these discussions. So if you'd like to join us on that discussion, I think, Bruna, correct me if I'm wrong, we're having a consultation in a virtual breakout room on the tech envoy position paper on the 13th as well. But anyway, I can share that on the list. Is it 13th? Okay. So we're having a consultation online on the Tech Envoy position paper. Do come to that if you're able to. And finally, I will be sharing soon a proposed letter to support, building on some of the discussion that we've had here today around the importance of multi-stakeholder frameworks and spaces for meaningful civil society engagement and overcoming challenges to meaningful civil society engagement, strengthening frameworks like the IGF. The IGF MAG on strengthening and strategy has released a paper with options and ideas on how to strengthen the IGF and how to operationalize ideas in the roadmap for digital cooperation in the options paper. On the IGF and reforming the IGF. And so Bruna and Paula and I have worked on a letter to just support, in principle, those ideas and to lend our support to the strengthening of the IGF. And I will share the text of that, the IGC list, and I hope that there will be broad support for lending IGC support to that reform effort. So that leaves us with a couple of minutes. I think, unless anybody has anything to say. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. Oops. I think we've answered your question, Jeremy, so I'm just going to say that we've answered it. So thank you so much for attending today. The next steps are for us to send you the summary of this session and really encourage you to attend the other workshop on public interest internet, which Bruna shared earlier on the 13th, and also to participate on the list and in other IGF forums on some of the issues that we've discussed, and to remain actively engaged and of course to share ideas and to remain actively engaged going forward in the IGC. So thank you for your time. I'm going to close. Bruna, did I miss anything? Is there anything you want to add?
No, everything as it's supposed to be, and thank you all as well for attending the session.
Yes, thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much if you stayed up late or you got up early, or you're just having a tiring day and you still came. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone.